Welcome to the edible garden at Moss House. This is the part of my garden which is closest to the house, and as you can see on this late autumn day, there is a lot of sun here. Sunlight is the most important element in a veggie garden because that will allow you to grow crops successfully. If you only have doubled shade or partial shade, what you can grow it's mostly leafy greens, things like kale or spinach, and you will not have as much success with fruiting plants or plants you grow for the roots. Now, when it comes to the garden location, obviously sunlight is important, but the other important element is to have your garden somewhere where you're going to see it often. So that's the entrance to the garden, and the house is just to my left. You can see that I have planted a lot of herbs in pots, and then of course I've got annual veggie beds here, and I've got a little table where I keep potted plants and seedlings, things I'm going to grow. Why it's important to have your edible garden close to the house or somewhere where you walk often, like on your way to the garage or to the chickens, somewhere where you walk several times a day. It's important because you would have some view of your edible garden every day. You could see any pests, you could see if the plants need watering, and this is something a lot of people forget about, and they put the veggie garden somewhere at the back of the garden, and they never visit it or not often enough. So sunlight is very important, and location of the garden, so you can actually see it pretty often. So let's see what else is important. Another important element of a veggie garden is obviously the soil. And what happens here is you get two main types of soil in Sydney, and that would be clay and sand. In this garden I've got clay, and instead of buying new soil, what I've done is I used some of the original soil which was in this garden bed when I excavated it, and then I bought a lot of sand. So I added sand to prevent the clay particles from gluing together. A lot of people are tempted to buy compost or garden soil from companies which do landscaping, and I have heard so many stories about lack of success because of the soil being either sterilized, so no microbial life, or being too alkaline or too acidic, that I decided to actually grow my own soil. You can grow your own soil, and that's very important. You don't have to be held by the bag of good soil. So I've got a lot of sand delivered. I mix it with clay, and the other thing I have added was gypsum to prevent the clay particles from getting stuck together. Another element I added is expanded volcanic rock. This is vermiculite, but you could also buy perlite, that's another one. And you can see the white spots in the soil, that's vermiculite. It also prevents the particles of clay from gluing together, but also it holds some water in the soil, which is very important. Because when you think about the soil, you think in terms of the structure of the soil. So in this case you can see it's pretty nice and loamy. There is no clay, and it just looks nice. And the other important thing is the soil pH, which is acidity. So that's something you can measure using a pH kit. For the garden you can get it from garden stores. Now when it comes to people who have sandy soils, you need to do something to make the soil to hold more water. So again, vermiculite is a good additive. And to sandy soils you can add clay. So you could either get clay from some deep excavations when people build new houses, or you can buy bentonite clay, and that will help you to increase the water holding capacity of the soil. But vermiculite and perlite are very good for that. It's just that they are expensive. You can find a company which uses vermiculite for packaging when they receive, say, fragile chemicals or some other goods. Instead of styrofoam, some of them use vermiculite, so that's how I've got mine. Another amendment I can use, and I use it in this bed to change the pH to a little bit more alkaline, it's wood ash. You could use garden lime, but I try to use as many amendments and additives as I can produce in my garden or get them for free. So that means my garden is a little bit cheaper to run. So now you can see that's the bed which is prepared for growing garlic. So it's very nice. It accepted a lot of rain, but because it's a raised bed, there is a good drainage here. Now when you look at this garden, it's actually pretty steep. The garden itself, it's on a hill, so that's why, and you can see the garden sort of stretches uphill. So important thing was to create raised garden beds to level the soil, because if I would try to grow things in the garden as is, that would prove very difficult, because after each rain the water would just run down the hill and take the soil away with it. So some people have garden beds for that reason, to make some level areas to grow plants. For some people, raised beds are really good because they also are easier to work with. They are a little bit higher up and they also offer good drainage. So that's why I grow most of my annual veggies in garden beds like this. So I was talking about the sun, I was talking about the soil. Now a very, very important thing in a veggie garden, it's reliable source of water. And I wanted to show you something which is very smart and very old invention, which is called an Oya. It's an unglazed terracotta pot, which you dig into the soil, like this one you can see here, and has got a nice plug shaped like a bird. So you dig the pots into the soil and you fill them with water. And if the soil starts drying up, say the plant roots are getting a lot of water from the soil, then through the terracotta wall the water goes into the soil. So it's like constant deep watering. And you just top it up depending on the weather. Like now I don't do that because we had rain and the pots are still full of water. But you could use this in summer with great success. And if you don't want to invest like something like that, like this nice elegant pot, you can just glue 2 terracotta pots together with silicone and also block the bottom hole, the hole in the bottom pot, dig them into the soil and just put water into the opening in a pot which is on the top. So that would work too. By the way, that's a very smart invention. It's covering my brassicas with wire baskets so the butterflies don't get to them, don't lay eggs. So that's another gardening trick you can think of. So let me show you some other watering methods. Because as I said, water is very important in a garden. We collect rainwater here, and I also have the little Oyas, which is the terracotta pots. You can see I've got them here in this brassica bed, and I usually mix vegetables which get along pretty well. So I've got here a little bit of garlic, I've got small radishes, and I've got dandelion, which is one of my favorite plants to eat and to make medicine. So it's quite a few plants, and I also got leeks, but they are really small so you can see them very well. So let's have a look. Now, the soil, it's important to add a lot of organic matter to the soil, and you can do this in 2 ways. What you could do is you could create lasagna bed or no-dig bed, which is basically putting on a soil which has been prepared in terms of structure. So it absorbs water, it's pretty nice, it's not compacted. You just put a lot of organic material on top. And that could be old decomposing straw bales or hay bales, lucerne, animal manures, say pelletized chook manure if you don't have your own chickens, don't have access to that. And you just line them up in layers on top of the soil, water it well, wait for about 2 weeks, and then you can start planting. Another thing you could do is to put seeds onto this, seeds of green manure plants, mostly legumes, things like vetch and also oats. buckwheat, and when they grow to about 30 centimeters, you chop them and you leave them on the surface to decompose. So you add a lot of organic matter on top of the soil with good structure underneath. Or if you are composting already, you can just add compost, and that's why this soil is so dark. So if you look at it, you will see this soil, which was red clay, it's now black. It's because it's got very high amount of organic matter in it. I also add charcoal because I have a fireplace, so I separate the charcoal from the ashes, and then what I do is I mix it with the soil. Charcoal, being carbon, will not decompose, and it will stay in the soil for hundreds of years. So it's a very efficient way of adding water holding capacity to the soil, and also charcoal is really good for developing bacterial life because it's very porous. So let me see another method of watering your garden, which is sort of like constant watering, similar to Oya's, but a little bit bigger. So this garden bed, which is similar frame to the other beds you have seen before, it's converted into a self-watering or wicking bed. And the frame is lined with pond liner. Don't use builder's plastic. Try to use something that's really thick and stretchy, so pond liner is ideal. And then on top of the pond liner I put a lot of offcuts of PVC pipes, and that's going to be my water reservoir. That's where the water sits. And above 10-15 centimeters above the bottom of the pond liner I drilled an outlet or outflow, so the water, if it rains, will not drown the whole bed. The second layer you put over the pipes and the water holding compartment of this wicking bed is you put fabric which is called geotextile or ag fabric, and you put it on top of the pipes, or you could have stones or some other construction supporting this water reservoir so it does not collapse. You put the fabric on it, so when you put soil on it, it will not go into the water reservoir. So then you put soil prepared in similar way. It's important that you've got something that will wick the water from the bottom through the fabric. And I use a lot of vermiculite, or perlite could be used as well. And then I mix all these minerals with the soil, so you can see the soil is nice. And even if it's slightly dry on the top, which is not now because it's after the rains, there will be a lot of water. The deeper you go, the more water the plants can reach. So it actually promotes deep root system, and I can tell you the straightest carrots I would grow, they were in this type of bed. So self-watering garden bed, I've got more of them in the upper garden, but just the idea to show you this is how it looks like. And to top up the water, I've got a vertical pipe, and you could see there is water in here just under the soil, and that's how I top up the water in the wicking bed when it gets dry through the pipe. So I'm just going to put it on so I don't get any living things drowning here like lizards. And let me show you the upper garden, because when we talk about growing veggies, I was showing you mostly very intensive annual growing beds, and obviously they need a lot of attention, they need a lot of fertilizer in terms of compost and manures, because we want these veggies to grow very fast. But in the upper garden I've got a slightly different setup, and that's the garden, the part of the garden which contains a lot of perennials and fruit trees and some annuals as well. So let me show you how it looks like. Now, because my garden is on a slope, I try to capture water so it does not run down the hill, and you can see what looks like a pot covered with wood chips. So that's just over here. I'm sorry, little accident. The camera decided to flop. So this is what looks like a pot, but it's actually a trench. It's a trench which is about 1/2 meter deep and 1/2 meter wide. And you can see it sort of stretches horizontally across the slope. We call such trenches swales, and what they do, they stop water from flowing down the slope. This is a really good area for planting fruit trees, and you can see there is a lime here, there is a little kumquat at the back, and here you see a mango tree. So they grow pretty well on both sides of the swales, and I've got 5 of such trenches in a garden. Now, speaking about growing veggies, in this part of the garden I grow a lot of perennials. So one of them, that's the large plant here, it's yacon, it's Peruvian earth apple, and I grow it for starchy tubers. It's a good idea to grow as many perennial plants as you can, because they usually survive much worse conditions than the annual veggies, and you can harvest them very often even in winter. So you can see French sorrel, very much harvestable through the whole year. This is perennial basil. So again, you can get basil through the whole year. You don't have to limit yourself to the sweet basil, which is an annual, and it only really grows through warmer months. This is Florence fennel, which has been growing in this spot for about 3 years. So obviously it's listed as an annual, but you can see it's growing and making the nice thick stems again, so I will be harvesting it soon. Another perennial plant, it's yellowing now, but you can see it's asparagus. So this idea of having annual veggies closer to the home and perennial veggies further down in the garden is really a good one, because the further from the house you grow something edible, the less chance that you will be there very often. So you may not see these plants often, but because they are perennials and they are planted along swales which hold water, that means that they basically manage to survive even in pretty hot weather. Let me show you now another idea for growing veg in a garden, veg or herbs, and that's containers. Containers, especially on raised surfaces, are very good to grow veg if you don't have enough sun, because the higher you have a container, the easier it catches the sun. So now you've got my pineapples here in pots, and I used old concrete laundry sinks, and I grow here mostly turmeric and also some herbs such as mint and soapwort and valerian. And you can see my chickens, I think. Yeah, I have chickens. They are great for producing manure, and I have a little pond here. So the ideas for growing plants, edible plants in a garden: annual beds, growing them over swales, and if you don't have a garden on a slope and you cannot capture water to run into swales, you can create sunken pits and plant edible plants around them. Obviously, in a garden as steep as mine, and that's 11 meters difference in elevation between the bottom of the garden and the top. So in a steep garden, swales, horizontal trenches filled with wood chips, capture the water which otherwise would go down. So that's the most important element in designing the food garden. It's the sunlight, the soil, and the water. And obviously the placement of the garden in relation to where you go often, and so you can keep an eye on your garden. So thank you. That's my garden. Please ask questions now.